Hey everyone, we have an eye-opening discussion for you all today. I'm joined now by journalists Walker Brigman and Alex Koch to discuss their new piece out titled How the Koch Network Hijacked the War on COVID, which you can find on the Daily Poster and exposed by CMD, linked below the video on YouTube. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
So your piece is eye-opening but also upsetting in the sense that it really narrows down the genesis of the mistrust in the actions that could have prevented the continued spread and mutation of COVID-19. Discuss what you found.
So we found that there is a vast, opaque, right-wing network of nonprofits that has been funding and promoting anti-lockdown, anti-public health activism, research, and messaging. That's how I would put it.
So what is the genesis of all of this? Like, I read through the piece, the demand for oil, I mean, oddly, in a way, kind of plays a part of this. How does that play into the genesis of all of this?
So the network that we're talking about is Charles Koch's network, the Kochtopus. And Charles Koch, as your viewers will know, is an oil billionaire. And so that's where that comes in. The price of oil, the demand for oil, I should say, dropped in the first half of 2020, while the pandemic was first making its appearance in the United States. And so that's sort of when governments started implementing these public health measures, Koch and his network recognized the threat that the pandemic in general posed to their profits, and began to act to get us back to normal as quickly as possible.
So discuss some of the individuals and groups that were involved in the spread of these lies that are part of this network.
Yeah, we can start from
Alex.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can start from the sort of more traditional Koch network entities. Back in the spring and March and April, when the virus was really first taking off in the United States, we had the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is a Koch-backed corporate front group that pushes very right-wing legislation. They came out opposing the factory and business lockdowns. We had Americans for Prosperity, which is Charles Koch's premier political advocacy group, doing the same thing and getting their constituents riled up about it. And as we progressed through the year, we saw this trio of doctors who wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, which is essentially a treatise supporting herd immunity, a policy that, had we not locked down, had we not really taken the virus seriously, would have killed millions and millions of Americans on top of the 800,000 that have already died from COVID. And what we found was that this Great Barrington Declaration was actually incubated at a research group called the American Institute for Economic Research, also funded in part with Charles Koch Foundation money. And so we're going to call them AIER. What they did was they kind of mainstreamed the Great Barrington Declaration. They hosted the authors at a conference, and they created the website for the Great Barrington Declaration. And ever since, they've been promoting it and promoting these fringe doctors who somehow think that just everyone getting the virus and killing off the people who are most vulnerable is a good idea.
So just to clarify, the strategy that they recommend is what they call focused protection. So sort of a nebulous protections for the most vulnerable. That really what they describe is like hiring staff or using staff at nursing homes that have acquired immunity, people who have gotten the virus and are now immune. If we use that staff at nursing homes, we'll save a bunch of lives. This group of doctors does not believe that the vaccine provides meaningful immunity. In fact, and they think that natural immunity, or what they call natural immunity, is more robust and longer lasting, which is not what the science shows. That's not a mainstream view, and so that sort of informs their take. For example, in February, just before India saw its worst COVID surge, Bhattacharya said that it would be unethical to inoculate Indians because they had reached herd immunity through natural infection. And these ideas have been but these ideas have been discredited by, just what has happened throughout this pandemic. We've seen variant after variant. We've had Alpha, we've had Beta, Delta, and Omicron, and then tons of other lesser variants in between. We have not seen herd immunity.
Yeah.
And despite the spread. So it's been pretty devastating, the fact that these individuals and their ideas have been taken so seriously by a number of governments.
Yeah, so their impact has been across the board, right? Masks, vaccine mandates, contact tracing, lockdowns, and not just in America, as you mentioned. Worldwide, governments, lawmakers all across the world have taken on this.
Sweden, the UK, yeah.
Yeah. So
and definitely in the U.S.
Yeah. So this should help. Hopefully, at some point, help to wake some people up to the realization that if you are in that mindset of taking on this bullshit, realize what's at the heart of all of this, and that ultimately is the profit motive, right? That's what has driven a lot of this pushback against these sorts of lockdowns and any real actions taken against the control of the spread of COVID-19, because ultimately that impacts those at the top of these companies, at the top of society.
So it's not just the profit motive. I would also add that there's an ideological aspect to this as well that is sort of indirectly related to profits. If government were to do the things that it should have done, pay people to stay home, mandate paid sick leave, provide hazard pay to essential workers, ventilate buildings, all of that stuff, you prove that government can do things for people. And that undercuts the entire ideological basis for the Tea Party movement, for Charles Koch's vision of what government should be, that which is in line with Ronald Reagan's 9 most terrifying words. 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Well, what happens when government starts paying people $2,000 every month to stay home so they don't have to risk their health to survive? And people realize, wow, I'm making more than I did at my job, and I'm able to pursue other things. Like, that undercuts it. It shows that the most terrifying words actually are, "I'm from the government and you're on your own."
Yeah.
So I think that's a factor as well.
That's a great point. So, reading through this, a lot of it, I guess, isn't really surprising to see that a lot of this has been generated by Koch and they're connected and their network. But what surprised you about your investigation into this and what you found? What surprised you most?
Well, I think Walker can talk about a person who he's surprised about. But if I could just add first that it's important for your viewers to know that Charles Koch, the CEO of Koch Industries, his late brother David, and many of their right-wing, extremely wealthy compatriots have built up this libertarian network over 50 years. And so they're able to activate it whenever there's something that they want to change comes up. So, right when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, immediately, we had, academics at the lowest level. We had think tanks right above them. We had the grassroots or faux grassroots kind of state-based groups. We had the National Coordinating Group, which is Americans for Prosperity. And then we had the right-wing media, which kind of is a propaganda arm of this network, all activated immediately going against the lockdowns when we didn't even know anything about the virus. And then a year and a half later, almost 2 years later, I should say, this Great Barrington Treaty is proven even more wrong than before, when less was known about it in the fall of last year. And so, this is just a very powerful network that does this on a lot of different topics, on labor issues, of course, on fiscal issues and taxes. And they just thanked Americans for Prosperity, sent an email last night thanking Joe Manchin for blocking the Build Back Better bill, taking credit for that position because they ran commercials against him and they had their activists out there campaigning against the Build Back Better bill. So the point is, they're attacking every element of the agenda right now.
Yeah, and I think the most surprising thing that we found was that Professor Emily Oster, who's been mainstreamed by The Atlantic, and she had a profile done about her in Rolling Stone. She's been one of the most prominent people calling to reopen schools, a heavily cited expert. She's not an epidemiologist, she's an economics professor. And she's given some really strange health advice to parents about their children. For example, treat your kids like a vaccinated, elder, and enjoy your summer. Go out and enjoy your summer. And her research since June has been funded by the Koch-backed Mercatus Center out of George Mason University. So that was interesting to find. I mean, it's really a multi-tiered approach. They targeted lockdowns, they've targeted mask mandates, they've targeted school closures, anything that keeps us treating this pandemic as a new reality. They reject it because they want to keep up with profit growth that really isn't sustainable in a national emergency. Mm-hmm. And we are still in a national emergency. I mean, as much as we talk about recovery from the pandemic and post-pandemic, like, we're still in this. Yeah. And even though we have a vaccine, this virus is mutating towards evasion, towards greater transmissibility. There's no guarantee that this is going to get more mild over time, and then suddenly it'll be just like the cold or the flu. Like, we could see a strain that completely evades our vaccines, and then we're back at square one. That is a serious risk, and in order to deal with that, we have to contain the spread at home, and then we need to very quickly vaccinate the rest of the world. And the Koch network is opposed to efforts that could do that, like releasing the vaccine IV.
Yeah. And of course, right-wing media has helped to spread all of this crap. But what has been maybe not surprising in some sense, but incredible in another sense, is that we have these so-called left-wing outlets, or at least they try to present themselves as progressive outlets, also spreading a lot of this anti-vax, anti-mandate stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've done a dissection of Max Blumenthal's article for the Gray Zone, which is essentially a long-winded way of supporting the Great Barrington Declaration, saying that lockdowns don't work and that it's hurting the workers of the Global South. And as our video analysis and our article in the Daily Poster and exposed by CMD that came out yesterday very clearly show, the science does not back these conclusions at all. Why kind of the alleged left might want to ally themselves with Koch-funded academics and doctors is beyond me. But I will say that the people who are spreading this misinformation, going on Jimmy Dore's show, publishing articles on their websites, are really doing a major public disservice and are abusing their platform.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also point out that Blumenthal's article just repeats arguments that have been made previously by the Foundation for Economic Education, which is another Koch-backed venture. On their website, they have a post that essentially, before the Gray Zone article came out, makes the same case that lockdowns are responsible for an increase in global poverty and healthcare disruptions, why people can't get malaria treatment, which, first of all, the sourcing for these claims is dubious at best, and misleading at best. Another way to put it is that it's nonsense and just blatant misrepresentation. But yeah, it's pretty disappointing to see on the left people who would claim to be on the left. Look, the humane response, we know what it is. It's the pandemic response that provides people with enough money to thrive without risking their lives. That is the simplest, and preventing contacts. If we limit the number of contacts people have, we will limit the spread of this virus. It's a very simple concept. It's an airborne virus, and if you're not interacting with a ton of people, you're not going to be spreading it and getting it. And a lot of these deaths have been avoidable.
Yeah. And
through 2 administrations now, we have seen an unwillingness to embrace these kinds of pandemic response measures.
Yeah.
and that's frightening. Another claim that these individuals make is that these Great Barrington folks and their strategy has been, marginalized or ignored by the mainstream. But they had access to the Trump White House, and now the Biden administration, without has not really altered the Trump strategy, except that instead of just reopen, it's reopen but also push vaccines.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think this stuff is able to work on large groups of people. Unfortunately, I think because there is a sentiment, a desire for this virus to go away. I mean, people are tired of it. We're tired of talking about it. We're tired of COVID-19. All of us are. It's been almost 2 years now. But that doesn't mean the science behind it and the spread of it and the vaccines is somehow wrong because we are tired of it. Like, this is why people have to be aware, especially if you consider yourself to be, on the left or, of the working class. Really reconsider why so-called working class outlets are spreading information that is backed by the Koch network. Like, that should kind of, clue you into maybe the information you're taking in from those certain outlets is just full of shit, because they are clearly acting against science, against the data, against what needs to be done. What is disheartening to me about all of this is if we took these steps seriously from the beginning, we may have been over this, in a few months, if we had really locked down, had paid people to stay home, and really only had, the essential services out there, and even though in those cases made sure that they were protected, that there was, all of the, masking and everything going on. We could have been out of this a lot sooner, and ultimately, it could have helped those business leaders that hate these lockdowns, because we could have been over this quickly. But because we've taken this much longer approach, or this disjointed approach to attacking or to stopping the spread of this pandemic, it's really been, all over the place.
Yeah, and that's a great point you make, David. And, it's really a short-term profit-driven policy. And as you say, I mean, it's the same thing with climate change. Long-term, that is going to completely crash every economy in the world, one country by country. And Charles Koch won't be alive, but his son or perhaps his grandchildren, their kids are going to be alive when this happens, and they're going to be obviously they're going to have more protections than most people because they'll be wealthy, but they're ultimately still part of this planet, and they're still going to suffer the ultimate consequences when when our species is destroyed, in large part due to the greedy fossil fuel executives who have spread misinformation about this since the 70s and continue to do so. So the point is, I don't know why Blumenthal and these guys are latching on to these kind of pro-big business libertarian ideas. But the point is, they're horribly short-sighted. They don't follow the science. And yes, they are anti-worker. If they were pro-worker, would the Koch network that has basically enacted right-to-work laws in many, many conservative states over the last several decades, would they support it? That anyone can look up Charles Koch, just Google the guy. He's extremely anti-labor. It started with his company, Koch Industries, when they had some organizers that they quashed. And ever since then, he has been extremely anti-labor. There's a lot of reporting and documenting on this. You can go on sourcewatch.org, which is exposed by CMD's wiki about this. It is laughable to think that being against lockdowns, being against public benefits for people to stay home and be safe is pro-worker.
Yeah, the people that we're talking about here are like pro-child labor. They're pro-sweatshop. Yes. Like we're not talking about people who are like, raising their fist in solidarity. We're talking about people who have actively created the material conditions that have caused so many people so much immiseration. And I think when it comes to this pandemic, what we're looking at, in my opinion, is a crime against humanity. Mm-hmm. We are watching as thousands, millions of people worldwide are being sacrificed for the sake of capitalism and for the sake of global capital. That's what's happening. Yeah. In the U.S., we won't implement protections for workers. We won't implement a policy that is humane because big business does not want it. And that is what our article definitively shows, that big business does not want these policies. And if you're somebody watching this and you think that your interests align with these guys, these big business groups that are opposing these measures, you are dangerously wrong and delusional.
Yeah. Well, Absolutely fantastic piece. I'm glad you guys are doing this work. I'm glad places like the Daily Poster and Exposed by CMD are out there doing this kind of investigative reporting. So once again, thanks Walker Bregman and Alex Koch for coming on the show. And again, linked article below the video.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, David. Great to be back.